Today we begin William Shakespeare, probably the greatest writer in all of literature. Now, Shakespeare was born April 23rd, 1564, in the little town of Stratford-on-Avon. Shakespeare was the oldest son of 8 children. His father was a glove maker there in the city, but later, as Shakespeare grew older, the father ran for city office and was elected to the city council there in Stratford. Shakespeare was educated at a local school, but he never attended a university because the family fell on hard times, and Shakespeare had to go to the fields with his father to work and help support the other children. Now, Shakespeare in 1582, he married Anne Hathaway. If you'll do the math, you'll find that he was 18 and she was 26. Now, for those days, that was pretty scandalous, but nevertheless, they were married. They had a daughter, Suzanne, who was born 6 months later. Now, I'll let you do the math. This could have brought shame on the family, but it didn't, as the father was well liked in the community, and they were forgiven by the church. Later, in 1585, twins were born to the couple, Hamnet and Judith. So that made a total of 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, for Anne and William. Now, it is also rumored that they were never very happily married in all the years that they stayed together, that the marriage was not very happy. Now, we'll stop there. That's the end of part 1, and you can answer your questions on William Shakespeare. Little is known about Shakespeare until he appeared in London in 1592. He was living and working in London as an actor. He left his family in Stratford and he moved to the big city of London. He felt that if he was going to get his career going, he couldn't live in this little town of Stratford. He needed to move to the big city. So that's what he did. He left his family and he moved to London. In 1593, the London theaters were closed due to an outbreak of the plague. That meant that Shakespeare was out of work. When the theaters reopened, Shakespeare bought an interest in an acting company called the King's Men. Now, this was an acting company of men that went around performing plays, which was great for Shakespeare since he liked to write plays. Shakespeare didn't have a lot of money, so he had to borrow money from a friend to buy this King's Men. Now, in 1596, tragedy struck the Shakespeare household when his only son, Hamnet, died at age 11. Now, there's really no record of his death, except that we think it was the plague, because that was going around at that time, and so they think that the son died of the plague. In 1599, Shakespeare went in partners with another friend and opened the Globe Theater, where many of his own plays were performed. Now think about it. Shakespeare was doing pretty well. He wrote plays. He now had a theater which they could be performed in called the Globe, and he owned an acting company called the King's Men. So Shakespeare was pretty set up at this time. Now, he did write 37 plays, and he divided those into 3 groups: comedies, tragedies, and histories. Now that's the end of part 2, if you'll answer your questions for that section. In 1613, Shakespeare retired back to Stratford. He purchased his own home there in Stratford. Now, his wife at the time, Anne, was still living there, but he didn't move back in with her. Basically, once he left their home many, many years ago to move to London, he and Anne never did share a home after that. He continued to write for the London stage. Shakespeare was now a wealthy man because he had invested in real estate. Now, a lot of people find that funny. They assume that Shakespeare was wealthy because of his plays he wrote. But Shakespeare's plays were not produced, were not really written until after his death. They were done on stage, but they were never published until after his death, so he did not make money from the written word of his plays. After entertaining some friends at his home on his birthday, April 23rd, he took sick with a fever. Now, we know that night that he had had too much to drink and he had eaten a lot of herring, which is a fish. They don't know what happened, whether it was food poisoning or alcohol poisoning, but he died that night on his birthday in 1616. He was 52 years old. He requested that he be buried at Holy Trinity Church, where he was married and where he had gone as a little boy. That's where he wanted to be buried. So he was buried in the churchyard there at Holy Trinity Church in Stratford. Shakespeare, unlike many writers today, never wrote to make money. He wrote because he wanted to be known to the kings and the queens of his day. Shakespeare's last surviving relative died in 1670. In Shakespeare's will, he had a very unusual will. And in his will, he left his second best bed to his wife. What do you think that says? Now, answer your questions, and I hope you enjoyed learning just a little bit about this great man, William Shakespeare.